Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Nicolas Refn's Valhalla Rising in 2009. This is his seventh film and stars Mads Mikkelsen, of course, once again. And it's basically, this is a film that, I've been reviewing obviously Nicolas Refn films on my channel in order. This is a film that I had actually the potential, I had expectations that it could be potentially something I really, really like. But it's not acclaimed really. It's got around 6 on IMDb, and it's not too acclaimed. It's not too talked about. On ranking of Nicolas Refn films, some people put it fairly high. Others put it right near the bottom. But yes, I didn't really know what to expect. But that kind of thing really interests me. It's set around I think it was 1096 the year AD. It follows this Norse warrior called One Eye. Basically, the first sort of scenes are him. He's been taken captive, and he basically escapes. And then the rest of the film we'll get to anyway. But yes, it's a film that I was really looking forward to, and I didn't hear great things about it, but it just looks. That front looks pretty cheap, and it's kind of. That really is not what the film is actually. It's very, very misleading from. But it just intrigued me. Mads Mikkelsen, I really love as an actor, and just the kind of things it's about. And really up until that point, I don't think I'd actually seen a Refn film that I didn't like. But yes, I watched Valhalla Rising. It was last month, I believe. It's one of my films I watched of Refn. And yes, I must say, very, very disappointed. I can see why this one kind of goes under the radar a little bit in terms of Refn films. And yeah, it's a lot worse than what I could have imagined actually. And it's actually one of Refn's worst films. The first 15 minutes, I was quite impressed with some of the stuff that was going on. The character of Mads Mikkelsen at first, he seems like a character who is quite mysterious, and he doesn't talk in this film. That's the whole point, the whole idea. He's a mute character, which of course can work really, really well, or at least characters that you don't really see too much, in films. Like the Man with No Name. There's been many characters who say very little, but because of their presence and stuff. And the mystery behind them, because they're some of the best characters in cinema. It doesn't always have to be a character that's got loads of dialogue. Unfortunately, after the first 15 minutes, what Mads Mikkelsen he intrigued me. His character a little bit. After that 15 minutes, 20 minutes definitely, the film takes a real turn in every aspect. But Mads Mikkelsen, basically, his character becomes quite bland for the rest of the film. And unfortunately, he's one of the people that I think of when I'm thinking of boring protagonists. That's a shame because Mads Mikkelsen is such a great actor. But I really think, and this is co-written by Refn again. I really think the script is very, very flawed, and just the way obviously Refn wanted him to act. Fine, a character can be serious, but when they're like this and they don't say anything, but they're not really interested and they don't really show emotions, and there's nothing really that they've got to work with in terms of plot or other characters. It can be a character that turns into something that it's one of the worst things you can do. For a protagonist, is make them bland. And unfortunately, for the rest of the film, he really is bland, boring protagonist. But really, that's one of the least, the smallest problems with this film. So the first 20 minutes, you kind of see him breaking out of these chains and stuff. He's put to fights to the death kind of thing. These guys that got him captive and stuff, other prisoners and that. And there's some really well put together action scenes, fight scenes. Unfortunately, and that's on the back really, that scene there. Unfortunately, the rest of the film does not deliver on action at all. As in the stuff that is there, the fights later on in the film are poorly put together, and of course I can watch films that are they don't have to have loads of action in it at all. I'm not on about that. But actually judging the action that's in the film, a lot of it is very, very under average, and none of it really lives up to the intensity of that first fight or two in that first 15 minutes. And yes, it's just the rest of the fight scenes in the film are poorly put together, and the effects as well. The effects are crap, the blood effects, and it's really off-putting because it's a very dark tone, the color palette. But then I'm sure he's got these blood effects that are very, very bright, and it's not a thing that works. It was very off-putting, and you could tell it was fake. Just quite laughable. And the budget is near 6 million. I believe it was 5.7 million. It only made like 30,000 at the box office, so it done awful at the box office. But as well, what I'm saying is, for most of the film, they do just walk around, which we'll get to. I don't see where the budget went if the effects were this bad. It's a shame, and it's just not something you expect from. There's so many films that. And that's actually Refn, Fear X as well. The effects and the editing and stuff, it's awful. But, it's got really, it's a strong budget for a film that, for what this film is, especially Fear X as well, as just a thriller. It's just, you wonder where the budget went, it's just quite shocking. But yes, the effects were awful. The editing, he does that thing again in this film, the cheap red fade editing. But he does something even worse, these things that Mads Mikkelsen sees and imagines and stuff. And it's used in these really poor editing techniques that are involved, and just awful. They do not fit the rest of the colour palette, and they're just cheap. They're really cheap. Effects and stuff, and transitions and fades. Just awful effects throughout the film. So basically, after the 20-minute mark, which kind of it had me. I would have given this. I would have thought it was quite an average film, but something that's quite interesting. It's different. There were some things, of course, definitely showing up in these first 20 minutes. There's quite a lot of the flaws I would have had. I would have given it around a 6, maximum of a 7, because there's a lot of. Now I really think this is inspired by a Tarkovsky film, and I think Refn, is a massive, of course, fan of Tarkovsky films, particularly Stalker, and this is very much inspired by Stalker, I believe, and I've seen that. I won't talk about that film because that's not this review, but I think it's very much inspired by this, and it doesn't mesh. What Refn was trying to do with what he's clearly influenced by. Because basically the most of the film after the 20-minute mark is them walking around on boats, and then walking around these characters that he meets up with. There's this boy as well, which is called the boy in this film. You've got Gary Lewis, who's quite a big actor. He plays one of the characters, and you've just got these crusaders really that meet up with him, and they just kind of you could say they travel, but really they just walk around in search of I won't ruin what it's meant to be, but it's pretty obvious what it's trying to represent. But really, they do just walk around aimlessly. A lot of slow motion. The rest of the film is basically this, them on boats, muttering, ramblings, very Tarkovsky inspired. His late career, religious stuff that's very heavy-handed. Awful characters, lifeless characters that are just at times metaphors and nothing else. The use of slow motion just really it makes it mind-numbingly boring and slow, and there's just nothing. The character development of any of the characters or anything that goes on that's compelling. All the narration that the monologues that happen are just so pretentious. There's the key word here again, pretentious. This is a really pretentious film, and it's pretentious, boring, lifeless, and just cheap as well. They just, for the rest of the film, they're on the, when the boat scene happened and it lasted for about 15 minutes, I knew that this is what was going to happen. It's going to take a turn, this film, and unfortunately it did, and it became horrendous for the most part. Just literally, and I'm not just describing this, they're just walking around. There's many films I've seen that there's a lot of walking about and there's not much dialogue, and it's wonderful. Days of Heaven I recently reviewed. That is just proof that it doesn't have to be all this sort of loads of things going on in that sense. But the characters do just walk around in this, and there's nothing to the film. They're just aimlessly walking through, trying to find something, it's trying to be spiritual again, and it's failing for me. You know, you may like this film, great, but I really hate this film actually, because what it turned into, one of the most boring films I've ever seen. It's a shame, you know. Fear X was also one of the most boring films I've seen. Probably more boring than this, I'll give it that. You know, it's not quite as boring as Fear X, but it's not far off. And you know, Refn really just hit these two lows. Quite close, you know. It's just a shame that these two of these films in his filmography is so bad for me. And yeah, no, it's an absolute slog of a film. Nothing interesting that I can take away from it. And in the end, it is so heavy-handed and so on the nose. You know, it's religious stuff, you know, spiritual stuff, heavy-handed for me. And there's proof many times that you don't have to be heavy-handed with that. You know, it's just so on the nose and so metaphorical in the worst ways, that it never moved me at all. You know, I never got invested in anything that was happening. You know, if I had to say, I'd avoid this at all costs. You know, it's such a bad film. And look at the front. You know, very misleading. You know, it really is in disguise. It's a really, really poor, you know, interpretation of you know, a callback to a Tarkovsky film. You know, and you know, I'm not a big fan of Tarkovsky, as you'll maybe find out one day on my channel. But really, this is it's just pointless to kind of copy. I believe it's kind of like very much inspired by Stalker in particular. It just does not work on any level, this film. You know, Stalker was better than this, even though, you know, I'm not a fan of it. And it's just such a shame because Mads Mikkelsen, you know, did not play, you know, an interesting character at all. All the other characters are boring. They're told to do pretentious stuff. The colour tone at times is really overly dark as well, to the point where you just can't really see what's going on. And other times, you know, it contrasts with the crap, you know, bright blood effects stuff. Really a poor film, you know. Overall, I think I'd have to give this film a 24%. I think it's really bad, you know. And if it wasn't for that, you know, it wasn't for that first 20 minutes or so, it would have been awful for me. You know, just awful for the most part. Just lifeless. There's no energy. There's no life to this film. It's not human, and you know, it tries to be, I'm sure, but it's not. You know, and it's just because it's very, very fake and pretentious, and all the metaphors and everything and the symbolism overtakes any sort of characters. And there's no characters that are interested in this film. They're all, you know, awful characters, underdeveloped. The performances of all the supporting cast are not good, and just as well, just told to kind of boringly, you know, travel through these lands in such an uninspired way, that it's just really a pointless film. You know, it amounts to nothing. It never moves me on any level. The visuals at times, cinematography early on, it's okay, nothing to speak of. But a lot of the editing and the effects and some of the cinematography is just not good. You know, even, you know, I can't even say this film's shot really well because it's not. You know, it's quite uninspired a lot of the time. And unfortunately, Valhalla Rising, a really bad film. Wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to check out Refn's filmography, go ahead. But I'd say proceed with caution. And you know, I hate this film. But of course, as always, and you know, encouraged to check it out. You know, because you may like it. I thought I would, but I hated it. And you know, I like all types of films, but this is just what cinema I really get pissed off with happens. You know, when it happens, pretentious, boring, and you know, lifeless and not human, and heavy-handed in its themes. You know, I can't praise this film, and I can't really talk too much about it. Just watch it and figure out, you know, what I was on about, maybe what I was getting to. But of course, with respect, always, you know, check out the film and see what you think. For me, I hate it. I hate this film, and Valhalla Rising, not great. Next up will be Drive. See what I think of that, and I'll be reviewing that very soon. So thanks for watching my review of Refn's Valhalla Rising.